He knows the problems of the players. He was a coach. He understands the problems of the coach. So they might not always be happy with his decisions, but they knew it was coming from a place where the guy actually experienced all these same things that we did. And Upton, of course, was an observer in all of that, as we say, present at the creation. And then came October 11th, 1959 at Franklin Field, where his dad had been a star player for the University of Pennsylvania, where he had owned the Eagles, and where, in a very odd way, it was perhaps fitting that the end came for his dad at Franklin Field. And Upton was, I believe, barely old enough to drink at that point, and was at the stadium. And maybe you could relate the story of the passing of his dad, which a lot of people weren't sure what was going to happen in the National Football League, because at that point, his dad really was the commander of that league.
I will say, you've gotten the book, is that it is one of the, and I did not set up, I just told the story. It is one of the best written chapters I've ever read about somebody facing death. Because as Ron pointed out, October 11th, and my birthday was 2 days later. And of course, being the young, somewhat basketball player, never going to class, having a great time up in Bell, it was just another game. And it's interesting, by the way, all of Bert Bell's children were there, my sister, my brother, because we always went everywhere with him. He was a great father. So as Ron explains it, what you'll read in the opening chapter is that it was somewhat a hot day. Bert Bell, ironically, and Red Smith wrote about this later, one of the great writers of all time on sports. October the 11th, hot day, Eagles, who he founded, Steelers, who he used to own, on the field where he became a star, went to the Rose Bowl. In the last 2 minutes of the game, I'm sitting there, as Ron explains it, with two friends of mine, and my friend says to me, there's a guy over in the end zone that's down, and he's in a brown suit. Now, the way Ron describes this whole thing is really amazing. In fact, a friend of mine who had talked about doing a movie of this said, that's drama, let's just do that and forget the rest of the chapters. So I looked across and I saw, because I knew that suit, he only wore two suits, a blue in the wintertime and a tan one in the summer. I looked over and I said, that's him. I jumped out of the stands, ran across the field. Actually, I think I ran onto the field of play and got over there, and he was lying on the ground and they were trying oxygen. Ironically, because the Steelers stunk and never did anything right, they went down to get the oxygen to try and save his life. Oh, I'll never forget this. They're putting it on his face and the oxygen doesn't work, and somebody said, the son of a bitching Steelers, nothing ever works, even in death. So that's, I know it's funny, but that's, so they took him out, and that was, it took him up to the hospital, and that was the end of his life. Very dramatic. In fact, Tommy McDonald, who just died, and a great article about him, Tommy McDonald, as he crossed the goal line, caught the winning score for the Eagles to upset the Steelers. At that moment, Bert Bell dropped dead. Absolutely. And McDonald said he looked up in the stands and he thought everybody was cheering for him, running all over the place. And actually, it was people running all over trying to save Bert Bell's life. So that's the way the book starts. And the other part of it is, Art Rooney, who was his partner there that day, was so shocked he started to walk, as Ron explains it, up the trolley tracks, because the hospital was not very far from there, and almost died because the trolley just about missed him and would have killed him. So there was a lot of bizarre things, but I will say, as we move on from there, that single act, which is a lesson for all of us, and Bill, the great writer over here, would understand this, that changed my life forever. It was never going to be the same again. And basically, I think about that every day. what would happen. Not so much what we found out later in the week, which Ron wrote about. Wednesday, the funeral hasn't taken place yet. We get a call from the Philadelphia National Bank, and they said the deal's off. And we say, what the hell are you talking about? Bert Bell had seen that he was sick and had made a secret deal to repurchase the team that he bought originally for $950,000. Today's worth billions. And the bank said, we can't go through with the deal. He died on Sunday. If he'd lived 3 more days, we would have owned the Eagles. But then I wouldn't be here.
Exactly. Now, one of the interesting things, of course, had his dad got the Eagles, control of the Eagles back, Upton would have spent the next 25 to 30 years in football with the Eagles, more than likely. And instead, he had to find another route to football. But his dad had sort of somewhat taken care of that, although you never know, because Cal Rosenblum was a dear friend of his dad's and had been a running back when his dad was coaching at University of Pennsylvania. And in fact, his dad convinced him to buy the Colts when the Colts were flailing away and nearly out of business, and now they were coming back to Baltimore. And he wanted a local owner, and Carroll was from Baltimore. Ultimately, at first he said no, but ultimately he convinced them. As the greatest move Carroll Rosenblum ever made. But one of the things that Upton's dad, and we talk about it in the book, said to him several times, now, make sure you got to look out for my kids. If something happens, you got to look out for my kids. And they had big houses very close to each other, not too far from Atlantic City. What's the name of that town? I was forgetting. Margate. And beautiful house. I was actually down there one day doing my little diligent research, driving around Margate, and I found the house. And I called Upton and I said, I'm not sure there's a house, this is the right house, but there's a massive statue of an elephant here, and which apparently is a landmark. He goes, that's it, right, 50 meters from the elephant, sure enough. And they used to go down there. So after Bert passed away, Rosenblum told him that we got a job here. So the next thing you know, the commissioner's son was picking up towels for the Baltimore Colts and doing anything else that they asked him, and that's that first training camp in 1960, and that's really how he started in football, although he didn't stay picking up towels for too long.
Well, a couple of things, which you'll see in the book, and Ron and I went back and forth on this. Carroll Rosenblum was the closest thing to Howard Hughes I've ever seen in my life. He's the only person, even though he's a great friend of my father and said, I'll take care of your kids. I once went in and asked him for a raise, and I think he cut me in salary, and I walked out and said, thank you very much, Mr. Rosenblum. He was a fascinating, scary, brilliant person who had, I think, 5 or 10 other lives that nobody ever knew about, including, which we get into, the dichotomy of somebody who really helped me, but in the end, I believe, was gambling on games, which would have discounted him for an NFL owner. But basically, I came to Baltimore in 1960. Now remember, 58 and 59, the greatest teams in pro football were the Baltimore Colts. I was at the 58 championship game and saw the greatest moment. You can look at it on grainy film and you can say, well, it doesn't compare to what we see today. But if you were at that game, it was like seeing Lawrence of Arabia, whatever you want to call it, a great movie, a great drama coming down to the very end with the quarterback that we talk about later on with Tom Brady giving the greatest performance I've ever seen. And as Ron talks about it, walks off the field after scoring the greatest touchdown at that time in history, which saved pro football like it was nothing. He had done his act, see you later, none of the celebration, bouncing the ball, doing the grunt crap and everything else. He was gone. But that going to that camp that year, which he really captures, and then going on with the Colts. You can't believe it. If people talk about Brady and Gronk, and I'm trying to show you with the identification, if you walked into that camp in those years, there were sometimes 20 or 30,000 people there for practice, not being ushered in and not going through all of this stuff. You have to have a pass or anything else like that. In fact, one of the great filmmakers was there as a young kid. Big Daddy Lipscomb, funnier than Gronk. A great, great personality. Played with the Harlem Globetrotters, could do things you couldn't believe. Unitas, Raymond Berry, who used to tie himself to a tree, which Ron captures, and I'm the dopey kid out there throwing him footballs as he is on a rubber band in a tree, trying to catch them at all different angles. Alan the Horse Amici, Unitas, Lenny Moore, still one of the greatest running combination receivers I've ever seen. All of this in an atmosphere that would not be understand. Alan Amici up no air conditioning in the middle of nowhere, and Alan Amici playing Pagliacci and playing all sorts of opera, and people saying, what the hell was this? It was just an amazing time, which we get into in 2 or 3 chapters, and you can start with some of the stories.